Welcome to the Science of Success. Introducing your host, Matt Bodnar.
Welcome to the Science of Success, the #1 evidence-based growth podcast on the internet, with more than 1 million downloads and listeners in over 100 countries. In this episode, we discuss how a neurologist's perspective on your brain fundamentally ignores the health of the entire system, how your gut biome's role in depression, mood regulation, and how the microbiome controls your behavior and emotions. We ask why it's so hard for people to break negative eating habits. We look at the biochemistry of addiction and discuss the incredible importance of understanding your microbiome and your gut health, and much more with Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary. I want to give you 3 quick reasons why you should join our email list today by going to successpodcast.com and signing up right on the homepage. First, you're going to get an awesome free guide that we created based on listener demand. In fact, this is our most popular guide called How to Organize and Remember Everything. You can get it completely for free, along with another sweet bonus guide that's a surprise you'll find out when you sign up, by joining our email list today. Next, you're going to get curated weekly emails from us every single week on Monday. This is our Mindset Monday email. People have been sending us emails telling us how much they love Mindset Monday. This is a quick list of articles, stories, and things that have us excited right now. Lastly, you're going to get the exclusive opportunity to shape the show, vote on guests, change our intro music, which we did recently based on listener votes from people who are on the email list, and be part of the community. So go to successpodcast.com and join the email list right now. Or if you're on your phone, if you're on the go right now, just text the word SMARTER to the number 44222. That's SMARTER to the number 44222. In our previous episode, we discussed the darker side of how the U.S. military influences human behavior. We touched on brainwashing, reading human body language, creating Manchurian candidates, how this one psychological bias can convince a stranger to murder someone in up to 80% of cases, how to profile someone and search for their weaknesses, and much more with Chase Hughes. If you want to get into the darker side of influencing other people, listen to that episode. Now for the interview. Today, we have another fascinating guest on the show, Dr. Kulreet Chaudhary. Dr. Chaudhary is a neuroscientist and Ayurveda expert. She's participated in over 20 clinical research studies working with new stem cell therapies for diabetic neuropathy and drug development for the treatment of ALS. She also is the author of The Prime, Prepare and Repair Your Body for Spontaneous Weight Loss, and is a regular guest on the Dr. Oz Show. Kulreet, welcome to the Science of Success.
Thank you so much, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we're very excited to have you on today. So I'd love to start out with a story that you share about your migraines and how that helped shape the journey that you've gone on to really dig into gut bacteria and how all of that impacts our well-being and our neurology as well.
Sure. So kind of like many stories of doctors who've gone into integrative medicine, it often takes a personal experience to kind of bypass all of the biases that you've been trained with. And my story is no different. I was trained as a neurologist, and shortly after I started practice, I developed migraine headaches, which, for a neurologist seemed like no big deal because I have all of the treatments that I could use to control them. And so the doctor became the patient, and I started myself on the different medications that I give to my patients. And I was just absolutely horrified by the side effects, how awful I felt. I could not figure out if the migraines were worse or if the side effects from the medications were worse. And so that really forced me to go back to my childhood. And I turned to my mom, as all good neurologists do. When they can't figure out what's wrong with them, they go to mom. And I said, I can't seem to get these under control. I remember growing up, we were always exposed to different Ayurvedic remedies. And she was the one who referred me to an Ayurvedic practitioner. And, just as I kind of mentioned in the book, it was a bit of a culture shock at first because, here I walk in and this practitioner, this Ayurvedic practitioner, is feeling my pulse to get an estimate of where my health was. And the first thing he starts talking about is my digestion. And so for me, I felt like, this is just some total quack. They don't know anything about the nervous system because all he asked me was about my digestion. But since I had absolutely nowhere to go from there, I took his recommendations. Everything I had done had failed. So at this point, what did I have to lose? And so I started working on my digestion. And lo and behold, within 2 months, my headaches were completely gone. And so that forced me, as a neurologist and neuroscientist, I had to take this seriously and look into this. And so it forced me to take Ayurveda more seriously and take their perception of the nervous system as an extension of your gut health, that the health of the brain is highly dependent on the health of the GI tract. And I started to study it. And so that was kind of the beginning of this entire journey.
So I want to dig into a lot of those different concepts. Let's start with, and I'm sure I'm going to completely botch the pronunciation of this, but Ayurvedic medicine. What is that, and how does it approach the human body? And as a scientist and a doctor, how do you think about, as you said, you had some sort of biases about that. How do you think about the perception or the belief that a lot of people have that it might be sort of woo-woo or out there or not really rooted in science?
Sure. So we'll start kind of with one thing at a time. So you asked, first of all, what is it? The way I describe Ayurvedic medicine is it's really kind of the original lifestyle medicine on planet Earth. So it's the oldest recorded medical system, originally located or originated, I should say, in India. But as we look at indigenous cultures all over the world, they had a very, very similar medical concept towards balance and health. And I almost hesitate to even call it medical because it was really just a way of living. And the basic principles of Ayurvedic medicine is that food is medicine, that the way that you live will dictate whether you are sick or whether you are healthy, and that there are certain imbalances that result to disease that can be reversed by changing certain habits. And so if you look at really the fundamental aspects of Ayurvedic medicine, it's really not that different from a lot of the newer lifestyle medicine coming out today, like functional medicine. And in fact, functional medicine actually looked heavily towards the history of Ayurvedic medicine to help come up with some of the formulations and some of the protocols that they use. And in terms of, how I look at it, what struck me the most, and especially as a neurologist, because we tend to look at the brain as this protected system in this, hard skull that is somehow separate from the rest of the body. And the biggest shift for me was realizing that the health of any one organ really depends on the health of the entire organism, meaning us. So you can't look at disease in any particular area in isolation. When somebody's sick, there's a particular story to how they got there, and it involves a lot of different systems. If you do not understand that story, you can never really get rid of the underlying disease process. And you bring up a really great question, because if you would have asked me 20 years ago if I would be doing what I'm doing, I would have just laughed because I was this very hardcore scientist. And people who go into neurology in particular like it because of how black and white it is. It's something that can be easily studied. It's got all of these wonderful tracks, and it's a seemingly knowable system. And so I would have said I would have been one of the last people to have immersed myself as deeply as I have. But what is amazing really to me about Ayurvedic medicine is how it sees the body and the whole person as a dynamic unit, and how the environment impacts your body, how emotions impact your body. It's just such an unbelievably holistic way of looking at it. And because it's so holistic, there are so many different ways that you can approach an issue that takes into consideration, rather than the myriad of symptoms. Like I'll have patients coming in with 10 symptoms, and I see it as just one simple problem. And the last point you make is really fantastic about, well, how as a scientist, do you not look at this as kind of woo-woo? And what's been fascinating, Matt, and I wish I could have taken, credit for knowing this and foresight when I first started. But Ayurvedic medicine is so scientific. It is so unbelievably comprehensive. And science now is starting to catch up with it. And a couple of really simple examples is like just looking at the study of the spice turmeric. I mean, it's being studied for, how many countless different diseases. And it's just a spice. It's something that people just put in their food every single day. Another example is the microbiome, looking at how the bacteria, particularly the bacteria in your gut, affects so many different conditions, particularly neurological conditions. So the funny thing is, as a Western scientist, I'm seeing that we are just starting to catch up with the knowledge that was present 5,000 years ago.
That's fascinating. And I think the point that the Western approach in many ways is so dialed into each specific component and, the brain and just how it works with, in many ways, to the detriment of the understanding of the system at large, is why some of these integrative approaches like Ayurvedic medicine have really come back recently and started to be more studied, and people are starting to understand, hey, these ancient cultures were actually onto something, and there's science behind why these herbal remedies, things like turmeric, were so effective.
And it was particularly interesting for me, Matt. As a neurologist, I wasn't expecting to see the types of shifts that I saw. What was particularly shocking was how many psychological conditions that we have diagnosed people with were just simply related to their gut health, particularly the colony of bacteria that resided in their colon. And I would have patients who would come in with, 20-year history of depression. And I would say, you're not depressed. You just have the wrong colonization of bacteria. And it was so hard for them to believe that it could be that simple. And sure enough, as we started implementing changes that would shift their bacteria from one population to a healthier population, the depression would simply resolve. And again, we're just starting to find that out, that 90% of the serotonin actually comes from your gut. I mean, I never learned that as a neurologist. And so if 90% of your serotonin is coming from your gut and you have the wrong people, the wrong organisms growing in your gut, and they're no longer providing that serotonin, of course you're going to have things like depression. So that was really kind of interesting to me, is how deeply connected the mind is. So not just when we're talking about brain health, like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's, but our mind health, our mental health is directly related to our gut health.
That's a great point. I think that's a good segue to dig deeper into a lot of the conclusions from the Prime and from your work around how gut health underpins so much more of our broader health. I'd love to start with, before we dig into it, I absolutely want to get into how gut bacteria can impact things like depression and anxiety, because those are topics we talk a lot about on the show. But I'd love to start with negative eating habits. And you talk about how negative eating habits and changing them, is it just a question of willpower? If I want to eat more healthfully, do I just not have enough willpower if I have an extra donut or don't eat my kale salad?
Sure. And again, was another big surprise. And this was the real advantage of having a scientific background and being involved in so many clinical trials, is when I saw this happening in my practice, I immediately started to investigate deeper into this and say, well, why is this? And so when I first just started incorporating this information into my medical practice, it seemed like the easiest thing, that, hey, I've got all of these new behaviors that reverse neurological conditions, just implement these dietary changes and you will feel better. And the result was that 15% of people couldn't do it. 15% of people could not, only 15% could do it. 85% could not change the way that they were eating. And so I looked at this, and, these were people who were extremely successful in other areas of their life. So I couldn't say, well, it's a lack of willpower or it's a lack of discipline, because they were so disciplined in other areas. So why would you be so disciplined in one area and unable to make a change in another? And the big difference here is the neurochemistry or the biochemistry that was underpinning why they were eating the foods that they were eating. And these were not unmotivated people. I mean, they were unbelievably motivated to change because, they wanted to make these changes to reverse neurological conditions. So this was as motivated as a group as you could get. And so what I started to look at was, what were the actual obstacles to change? And I realized that it was a biochemical obstacle. And the biochemistry of it was very well known to the food industry, who has taken full advantage of that biochemistry to make sure that people were tied into these food choices. And so, really, the main reason for me writing the book was just to kind of level out the playing field so that people understood what the biochemical challenges of changing the way that you eat in particular are, so that you can overcome them. And a big part of this challenge, again, is that microbiome, which dictates quite a bit of how you actually choose your foods by releasing certain chemicals that give you that high feeling when you eat certain foods that they need to survive. So if you've got the wrong guys in your gut, you can see how their response to a donut will suddenly make you feel so wonderful and elated versus, their response to like the, vegetable plate that you pass by. And what happens is that as you begin to shift the bacteria, first by changing the underlying biochemistry that determines which guys live in your gut, your choices for food actually begin to change spontaneously. And the worst part of it, Matt, is, in the beginning you might say, okay, well, the donut makes me feel good, so I'm just going to keep eating it. But over time, there's a process that happens in the brain called neuroadaptation, where it's no longer a pleasure response, and you actually have to eat the donut just to feel okay. So it's no longer a high, it's that you actually feel low until that donut goes in. So it's a lot of the same thing that happens like with other addictions, except this one is with food, which for me is the most dangerous addiction because it's the most widely available substance and it's the most cheaply available substance. And it's something that we completely allow for, the food industry to market towards us without any regulation.
So tell me about the science behind how those addictions form in our brain and how how we go from eating the donut to feel good to just eating the donut to feel okay.
Absolutely. And this is the wonderful part is we've actually made quite a bit of progress in the biochemistry of addiction, which is why we approach addiction so differently. But we have not made the connection that food is also acting like an addictive substance. So much of it has to do with the neurotransmitter dopamine in particular. Now, there's many other neurotransmitters involved, but it's easiest to talk about the response to dopamine. So dopamine is our feel-good neurotransmitter, and we need it. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't survive. So let's say, let's go back several thousands of years ago. If you were to find a fruit tree in the middle of spring and you ate it and you got that sweet sensation, your brain would send you a signal that, hey, this is good. Go ahead and eat this now because later on in the winter, this is not going to be available. So you would get a small response of dopamine in the brain and you would feel good when you ate it. Now, if for example, if sex didn't feel good, we wouldn't do it. And it's the same thing. When you have sex, you release dopamine, and that's why it actually is pleasurable. So these things are present, this, this release of dopamine, these messages in our brain are present to sustain the human race, basically. If food didn't taste good, we wouldn't consume it. If sex didn't feel good, we wouldn't do it and we wouldn't reproduce. Now, fast forward to our modern world, and what has happened is that, so there's an actual industry called food scientists. They have figured out what is the most powerful combination of sugar, fat, and salt that produces a massive dopamine spike. Now, you might say, well, gosh, that sounds fantastic, because if a little dopamine feels good, imagine how wonderful a huge spike of dopamine would feel. The problem is, whenever your brain experiences something so out of balance, it sees it as a stress. So even though dopamine is supposed to make you feel good, your brain sees this massive overstimulation as a problem. And it is a problem because it's basically overstimulating your dopamine receptors. And so the brain, which is an incredibly intelligent organ, looks for a way to counteract this response. So you're eating the food and going, oh my God, this feels so good. I've never had anything taste better than this, glazed donut. And so every time you eat it, your brain is now dampening your dopamine response to the stimuli. But now what happens over time, Matt, is now the foods that would naturally cause that dopamine to rise a little bit to make you feel good, they're not doing anything. So now when you have like just a fruit, for example, it's not even giving you a little bit of pleasure. Or now, and this happens in oftentimes in relationships, now even being with a partner or having sex is not giving you that same dopamine. And so now you have to eat more and more and more of that particular substance to get the same response, except it's not a response of pleasure. It's a response to just feel normal. And so we see this process happen with multiple different addictions. But what our studies are starting to show and what our images of the brain are starting to show is that when you have somebody who is obese, they respond to sugar the same way that a cocaine addict would respond to cocaine. And we're talking about brain chemistry here. So when you start to look at the underlying neurochemistry of why we are actually eating the way we are, and you look at what's happening in the brain and what's happening in the gut, you realize this is not just some simple process of, hey, just shift how you're eating. If it was that easy, we would have figured it out. But instead, people are spending billions of dollars to try to reverse this, but they're doing it by doing the hardest part first, which is trying to change behaviors rather than just simply changing your biochemistry.
So before we dig into more of the interventions to potentially remap the gut and help change this biochemistry, I want to bring in the other component of this, which are toxins. Tell me a little bit about toxins in our environment and how they impact us.
So this is becoming one of my favorite topics because it's becoming such a huge issue. Now, what's interesting though, Matt, it's not just the toxins in our environment, although they play a huge part, but it's also the toxins inside of our body that we're creating by simply eating the wrong foods. So there's a general term for toxins in Ayurvedic medicine called ama. And we don't have exactly anything that corresponds to that in the Western world, but I kind of summarize it as toxic inflammation. But ama, or these toxins, they come from undigested products. And one of the greatest things about Ayurvedic, Matt, is it looks not only at the physical body, but how these toxins accumulate both in the mind as well as in your emotions. So you can have mental ama, you can have emotional ama. It's basically anything that has been undigested. So let's say you went through a very stressful time, maybe experienced a loss or went through, a divorce or something like that. If there was something unprocessed from that, that would actually turn into ama that gets stuck in your body. And so one of the main premises in Ayurveda is that it's the accumulation of these toxins or this ama that eventually becomes the nidus for disease. As they accumulate into the different organ systems, they start to trigger autoimmunity. Now, take just kind of life in the modern world, and let's separate that just from the environmental toxins. We're already under a lot of stress. So let's say you lived in a perfectly pristine environment, you would still have a toxic accumulation just because of the amount of stress that we go through and how quickly people are eating their food, the lack of connection really with cooking anymore. But now add on top of that all of the environmental toxins that we are simply being bombarded by. And the body's having a very, very difficult time just simply moving these toxins out. So there's a process that happens in the body, particularly in the liver, called biotransformation. And when there is a traffic jam, meaning there's more toxins that need to be processed than availability within the liver to remove them, what happens is these toxins just start to float around freely in the body. And this is a tremendous trigger, as I mentioned before, for autoimmunity and just damage to the organs.
And how does that tie back in with dumb gut and the leaky gut syndrome and all of those kind of symptoms or problems?
Oh, it's a great question. So one of the organ systems that gets damaged as these toxins start to bioaccumulate. So when they can't be biotransformed, they get accumulated in the body. is the GI tract. Because remember, your gut is where a lot of the external toxins that are present in your food. So, for example, if you're eating a lot of foods that have chemicals or pesticides, and a lot of people make the assumption that the chemicals placed in our food have been tested for safety, and that's not the case at all. And a lot of the chemicals that are sprayed on our foods, it's the same scenario. They're not tested for safety. So your gut is actually seeing these toxins firsthand, and it directly damages the gut mucosa. And the gut mucosa is where all of the magic happens for your digestion. It's where the enzymes are secreted. It's where food is actually transformed into nutrients. It's where absorption occurs. And so over time, you start to damage this, invaluable membrane. And this is also the home of all your healthy bacteria that want to support you. And so as it becomes damaged, you have more pathogens that begin to grow there. But in addition to the toxins that you ingest that impact the gut, now, your liver is trying to get rid of all of the toxins that you're breathing in from the air, that you're putting on your skin from your skincare products. A lot of people are shocked to find out that you actually absorb 80% of the things that go in your skin. So, my general advice is if you can't eat it, don't put it on your skin. But your body's absorbing all these toxins and it's getting processed through the liver. And whatever the liver can't process is also getting dumped into the GI tract. So the GI tract becomes kind of this common final pathway where a lot of these toxins get thrown into, and then your GI tract can't remove it either. So it becomes this horrific cycle. And so if you are accumulating what we would call AMA in the GI tract, you start to build up a biofilm. And this is this thick mucosal layer where all of the pathogens begin to grow, and it becomes very, very difficult to absorb nutrients from your food. So you're getting a shutdown of one of the most important systems that provides nutrients to the entire body, but it's actually now starting to become a source of toxic exposure, both directly from the actual toxins you're absorbing, but also the toxins being released now by these pathogenic bacteria that are now inhabiting your gut.
I'm sure if you're listening to the show, you're passionate about mastering new skills and abilities. And that's why I'm excited to tell you once again about our sponsor this week, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 16,000 classes in design, business, and much more. You can learn everything from logo design to social media marketing to street photography. And you can get unlimited access to the entire catalog for a low monthly price, so you don't have to pay per class like many other sites. They have some really cool courses on there. They have a course on Evernote Mastery. You know how much I love Evernote. Evernote runs basically my entire life, and I highly recommend using it as a tool, but also checking out their course on how to do it. They have a really cool course on productivity planning, and they have a course on mind maps. Mind maps are awesome. I have a mind map sitting on my desk that I'm looking at right now for The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. I love mind maps. It's an incredible strategy that speaks directly to your brain and your subconscious, and it's a really cool tool to remember things. But there's so many fascinating courses on Skillshare, and the cool thing is they've been so kind to the show. They've been an incredible sponsor, and they're giving all of our listeners a free month of access. So get in there. You can get free classes for up to a month completely for free. You can check out all of these courses. Just go to Skillshare.com/success to redeem your free month. So I think this is a good opportunity to tie in gut health back up to both sort of mental health and more broadly general health. So tell me about, actually, before we do that, tell me about one of the key components of that, which is you talk about the concept of the brain in your gut, or the ENS. Tell me what that is and how that plays into this interaction.
Absolutely. So the ENS is the enteric nervous system. And for some reason in neurology, we don't really study it very much, but it's very much a part of the nervous system. And it's an incredibly important part. And it basically is the brain inside of your gut. And it helps to coordinate the production of different digestive enzymes, the functioning of different valves. If the enteric nervous system is not functioning properly, there's certain valves that prevent gut bacteria from going into your small intestine, for example, that begin to dysfunction. So this enteric nervous system is kind of this relay communication between your gut and your brain. Now, the assumption was that the brain was doing most of the talking and the gut was doing most of the hearing. But what our studies are showing is it's the exact opposite, that the gut is actually doing most of the talking and the brain is doing most of the hearing. And so the next question should be, well, who's doing all of the talking then? Like, who is dictating the content of what is being sent up through the enteric nervous system? And what we're finding is that the microbiome, or the hosts of bacteria and other microorganisms that live in your gut, are actually giving the content for the messages going to the brain. And they do it in multiple different ways. But there's a lot of neurotransmitters that are released from your gut. And the neurotransmitters, you can look at them as the vocabulary words that are sent up to the brain. So your gut bacteria is actually sending 90% of the messages via the enteric nervous system to your brain. So you should start asking then, well, how smart is your gut? And that's really the whole purpose of the prime, is to make your gut a smart gut. Because if you have a dumb gut, think about what messages are going up to the brain. And it's absolutely amazing, even in the studies that we've seen with animals, when you change the gut bacteria, you can take a mouse that has been genetically bred to be confident and turn it into a timid mouse just simply by changing the gut bacteria through a fecal transplant from a mouse that has been genetically engineered to be timid. So there's these personality traits that we have that we consider to be just, part of us, that we're somehow inherently in control of it through willpower. And it has more to do with the type of bacteria living in your GI tract.
The study about the mice I find really fascinating, and I'd love to know more. I've heard kind of on the fringes of some of biohacking and other health websites, people talk about fecal matter transplants in humans. Is that something that you think is an intervention people should look at, or do you think that they're still sort of unproven? What is kind of the science behind those, and what do you think about them?
Well, I think it's something to consider in very, very extreme circumstances. But what people don't appreciate is how quickly your microbiome changes just simply to your own behavior. So, for example, we've seen in studies that if you have a very stressful event, your microbiome changes within 24 hours. Same thing, if you start to introduce a very healthy habit, your microbiome, again, changes within 24 hours. So that your microbiome is this unbelievably dynamic. I mean, it's really like an organ. It's like an organ with consciousness. It really is like having a second brain working with you. But it's this very, very dynamic organism that changes. And so, most people who go for the fecal transplants, and I've had patients come into my office who are ready to do it, and said, okay, but what have you done with your diet? What have you done to manage your stress? Like, what have you done to actually change your microbiome? And they've done absolutely nothing. So those are interventions that I reserve when there's like a really severe pathogen that has completely colonized the colon and nothing else will work. But that's not the case for the majority of people. For the majority of the people, all you have to do is make some very simple interventions. And that's essentially the entire program in the book, is just simple interventions that spontaneously change your microbiome. But it always amazes me, Matt, that people are more willing to, look into getting a fecal sample from another human being and importing that into your body before looking at simple changes they could make that will simply spontaneously change, your microbiome.
And I think the challenge is, even from my own perspective, thinking about there's so much out there about gut health, gut bacteria, your microbiome, probiotics, prebiotics, all of this information. It's hard to distill or determine what are the right interventions, what are the wrong interventions, and what actually produces the right results. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you delineate between those, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the interventions that you've found through research to be the most effective.
So that's a great question. And one of the gifts of Ayurvedic medicine is it gives very, very clear guidance for this. So, what we're starting to find, we're kind of just in the infancy of understanding the microbiome. And so people are in this discovery stage. And what they're discovering is, hey, I found out this works. I wonder if this works for everyone. And so they'll make the assumption that if it works for one person, it works for absolutely everyone. And the beauty of Ayurvedic medicine is it's extremely personalized, it's extremely individualized. Even the program in the Prime, I have suggestions for people who have more of this tendency, they should do this, or people who have more of that tendency should refrain from doing this intervention. And so when we're talking about what is best for your microbiome, the first question that comes up is, well, who are you talking about? Like, which person are you talking about? What are their tendencies? And so Ayurvedic medicine makes recommendations for the microbiome that are extremely, extremely individualized. And, there is a tremendous amount of confidence in a system that has lasted for so long. It's been around just from a written standpoint for 5,000 years, but even around much, much longer as an oral tradition. And so a lot of the things that we are now just discovering about the microbiome has been written in Ayurvedic medicine for so long, but with the caveat that they explain who to give it to, when to give it to them, and when not to give it to them. So instead of having to do all this guesswork, and I totally agree with you, and people are oftentimes surprised when I say, whoa, no, you should not be on any fermented food. Your gut is not in a state to tolerate any fermented foods. Or I'll have patients come in and I'll look at some of the supplements they've started and I'll say, you're not even at a point where you can absorb or digest this. Or, you've added a supplementation for detoxification before you've even entered the nutrients into your body to support the detoxification process. So there is this intelligence towards, how you approach changing the microbiome, approaching detoxification. And Ayurvedic medicine just has so many guidelines for that because it's an extremely mature system. So as we're starting to grapple with, who should be eating what type of diet in Ayurvedic medicine, it's already set there based on what's their constitution, what season is it, what is their current imbalance, what were their genetic tendencies from birth, and we take all of that into consideration. And so what I put into the Prime is basically a very, very, very foundational program that has worked for the majority of my patients, which I then further personalize in the clinic. But it's such a foundational program for the microbiome that the majority of people can do it. And, it's something that is done step by step by step. And you don't ever take the next step until your body is ready to do so.
So what are some of the kind of, I know it's very individualized, but what are some of the basic steps or interventions that you recommend as a starting place to implement some of these ideas and improve people's gut health?
Absolutely. So the absolute most foundational steps are what the entire program in the Prime are. And people are usually shocked by how simple the steps are and yet how profound the results are. And so one of the steps in stage 1 is an herb called trifla. And I'm almost even hesitant to call it an herb because it's really a combination of 3 berries. But it's and it's something that is oftentimes just found in the Indian diet. And so we wouldn't even consider it as a supplement per se. But it's an herb called trifla, that's spelled Triphala. And it literally translates into 3 berries or 3 fruits. And each one of these berries in and of itself has such a profound yet gentle impact on the body. Just an example is amla or amalaki is one of the berries. And it's just one of the most powerful antioxidants on the planet. It has been shown to help to treat diabetes. It helps to maintain blood sugar regulation, reduces inflammation. So just amla on its own is so powerful. But that's just one of the 3 berries in trifla. But when you take all 3 together, it just becomes this very, very powerful, again, but gentle tonic for the GI tract and for removing all of these accumulated toxins. So that's one of the things that we add into stage 1. Another example is just a simple tea. Again, very easy to make, very gentle. It's a combination of cumin, coriander, and fennel. And you just take the seeds, about a teaspoon of each, boil it in about 5 cups of water, 4 to 5 cups of water, for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how strong you like it. Strain out the seeds, and you just sip that all throughout the day. But these three seeds, these three ingredients are amazing for healing the gut, rekindling what we call agni or digestive fire in the GI tract. So you can naturally begin to burn up the toxins in your gut. And so there's all of these simple types of interventions throughout the book that help you to essentially raise the IQ of your gut from a dumb gut to a smart gut.
And I can hear a listener now kind of thinking or saying to themselves, how is it that something as simple as coriander and fennel seeds could have such a positive impact on my microbiome? So how do you think about that, or how would you address a listener who might be thinking something like that?
So one thing that I have found in life, and especially as I've gotten deeper and deeper into Ayurveda, is that the simplest interventions are usually the most powerful. And the more complicated we get with things, I mean, if you look at just the complexity of our food sourcing now, what are oftentimes the recommendations people give when they want to get their help? They go back to eating really simple foods, go back to practicing really simple habits. So simplicity is quite powerful. And given the way that we live, can oftentimes be very difficult. So even when it comes to relationships, for example, just the power of something like forgiveness can be so unbelievably transformative, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. So why would something so simple have such great benefit? Well, this is one of the things that we're asking even as a scientific community. So take turmeric, for example. Scientists in America are starting to identify turmeric as potentially being one of the main spices in Indian cooking that has helped to reduce Alzheimer's disease in the Indian population by 75% compared to the US population. So why are these individual foods essentially so powerful? The reason is, unlike our medications that have only one effect, so they go in and they have a single unilateral effect, so they will affect one particular biochemical reaction and only in one direction. What these foods and what these spices have the capacity to do is to change hundreds, if not thousands, of different biochemical reactions, but not in a unilateral way. In other words, there is you can look at it as a scripted intelligence in food that goes in and actually interacts with your biochemistry, interacts with your DNA, and I would describe it as has a conversation with your body to determine where is it the most needed. So if we could create a pill that did that, it would be unbelievably powerful. Another example is just simply looking at a study done it's a particular type of mice that is genetically developed to have diabetes, have high cholesterol, have heart disease. And all they did was feed the pregnant mice B12. That's it, just a B12 vitamin. And what they found was that the babies, even though they still had the genetic mutation for all of those things, didn't have any of the disorders. So why are these simple interventions so powerful? Because they actually go in and interact and communicate with your body and then set forth a chain reaction that has the ability to benefit so many different cells through your body, rather than just simply going in like our medications do and affect one particular reaction always in a unidirectional way.
In many ways, that almost mirrors the highly focused approach of Western medicine to intervene and solve one particular thing, as opposed to the broader, holistically integrated approach that you're describing.
Very much so. And it's interesting because as we start to study these Ayurvedic supplementations from the Western standpoint, like they're starting to study turmeric, ashwagandha, baswalia, so many of the different herbs, it makes me laugh just a little bit because they're finding all of these benefits. But as an Ayurvedic practitioner, we would never give just a single herb. We're always giving multiple different recommendations at the same time. So even though the scientists are absolutely amazed by the results, in terms of an Ayurvedic protocol, it would be considered a very, very weak protocol because we always give multiple interventions at the same time that are all synergistic, making it even a more powerful response.
So one of the pieces from the book that I kind of struggled to grasp or understand, and I'm curious to get your take on it. I totally follow the parts about the microbiome and how it impacts our mental health and the vital importance of really cultivating a very healthy microbiome. But the part about the kind of the doshas, that to me was the part that I really struggled with. Tell me a little bit about that and how you reconcile that piece of it with sort of science.
Absolutely. So, what we're starting to find out, even in science through the field of epigenetics, is that genes can be altered by the environment. In other words, you come with a certain, percentage of genetic expression that would have a certain phenotypic expression, so a certain type of physical expression, but that the environment can interact with your genes to change that expression. So I look at the doshas as essentially ways in which the ancient Ayurvedic practitioners were able to describe this process of a genetic predisposition interacting with the environment, resulting in certain characteristics. So it's really looking at the mind, body, and emotional types as they interact with different stresses in the environment, different elements in the environment. And again, what was so amazing about this, and especially as I started going deeper and deeper into the field of epigenetics, and I really look at Ayurvedic medicine as the original lifestyle medicine. And so even the way that they describe epigenetic changes, we see that in the different doshas when they're exposed to different environmental factors. The way that I really saw it in my own practice was even just how the seasonal changes would cause certain neurological conditions to be worse. So in certain seasons, I always saw like migraine headaches would suddenly become much, much more aggravated. In other seasons, we would see peripheral neuropathies get much, much more aggravated. And this explained, again, how the doshas were interacting with the environment to bring about certain imbalances. And so we actually started to proactively in our clinic send out emails to people who had migraine headaches one season prior, just reminding them that this season has this impact. So it's really nothing more, how I see the doshas, it's really nothing more than looking at how your genes are interacting with the environment, including what you're eating, to create a certain physical, mental, and emotional outcome.
So for me, I struggled with kind of placing myself within a dosha. I felt like my answers were very mixed between some of the different segments. And so that's maybe part of the reason I struggled with that as a framework, because I felt that, some of the answers were like spot on describing the way I felt about something, but then the same answer for that dosha for another one would be completely the opposite of the way that I think or feel.
So part of it is most people have more than one dominant dosha, but you can also have a dosha out of balance that is not your original genetic makeup. And so those quizzes are really there to give you kind of just a general introduction into the doshas. But the way that you actually answer this question is through an evaluation with an Ayurvedic practitioner. So the quizzes are just kind of a little glimpse into that window. But when you sit down with an Ayurvedic practitioner, they do a full examination, they do a full history, and then they also do what we call pulse diagnosis. And through that process, that's actually how we determine which dosha is out of balance and which one we need to work on the most. So that explains why a lot of people, when they take the test, they'll feel a little bit confused. But again, it's meant to be just kind of an example of how the doshas may be expressed in your life. But the true diagnostic tool is always sitting down with an actual practitioner to determine it.
And just for listeners who've been listening to us for the last 5 minutes, wondering what we're talking about, I'll give my brief description. But essentially, my understanding is the doshas are an Ayurvedic sort of method that looks at different kind of body types, based on your weight and your, are you hot, are you cold, et cetera, and prescribes specific diets around how to balance that depending on sort of different types of your body. Is that an accurate description, or how would you describe them?
It's a partial description, but the doshas are actually tendencies in nature. And because we're seen as a part of nature, we have those particular tendencies as well. But you can describe the different seasons in terms of different doshas. You can describe different plants in terms of the different doshas. So it goes beyond just a description of the human experience to more of a general description of nature. Like even the ocean has certain tendencies, like being around the ocean, your body will change in a certain way. So it's described in a way to have more of one particular dosha than another. So the doshas are really just an aspect of nature. But what we attempt to do in Ayurvedic medicine is to determine which doshas are out of balance and bringing them back into balance using different lifestyle recommendations.
One of the last kind of conclusions that I just wanted to touch on, because we haven't really directly stated this, which I find fascinating about your work, you embarked on this path of Ayurvedic medicine at first to discover sort of the underpinning cause of many different mental health problems and neurological problems. And yet one of the biggest side effects of that, the interventions that you recommended, was that people actually had a huge amount of weight loss as well. Can you just talk about that, then kind of describe that for a moment?
Sure. So I would have never guessed that as a neurologist, I would write a book that, on the cover is advertising weight loss. But what I found was, my goal and the whole reason why I created this program was for my neurological patients. And the goal was really to change the microbiome, to remove these toxins from the body so that neurological disease can begin to heal. And through the process, what so many of my patients would say, and these were patients that had weight to lose. I often get the question of, I don't have to lose weight. If I do this, will I lose weight? I'm like, no. This is only if you have weight to lose. That would it make you lose weight. If you don't have weight to lose, it'll just help to increase your energy and improve mental clarity and get all the other benefits. But one of the things that my patients would routinely come back and say is, I started this and I lost 20, 30, 40 pounds. If you would have told me this in the beginning, I would have jumped on even faster. And so even though it's a program for neurological repair, it was the weight loss that got people most excited. And so there was a point in the process, for many years, I just kind of pushed it aside and just said, okay, yeah, that's fine. So you lost weight, but that's really not what the program is about. And there was a point where I finally realized that if I just told people that up front, just simply because of the way our culture tends to really focus on physical beauty, that if I told people that up front, they were even more motivated to begin. So I kind of just decided, instead of trying to fight the current, just to jump in and say, yes, this will help you to lose weight. And that became one of the main reasons that people then became so compliant with it. And the weight loss was not, how should I say this? It's not that it was unintended. It's just that it was spontaneous. They weren't trying to lose weight. It's just simply that as your body detoxes, as your microbiome changes, weight comes off.
So what would be kind of a starting piece of homework that you would give for a listener who wants to implement some of the things we've talked about today, kind of a first piece of homework for them to begin down this path?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was it really contains all of the fundamental principles to understand why you need to do this, and then gives you a tremendous amount of guidance of how to approach a program. So the book it's a really, really kind of easy starting point. But for those who say, even the book would be too big of a step first, I would simply say start with the Triphala. It's very easily available. The brand that I use is from MAPI, M-A-P-I. It's called Digestone. It's just Triphala. And just start with that. Start with 1 tablet in the evening, or start with 2 tablets in the evening if you feel like you need to go up to 2. And just start with the tea recipe. Just those 2 simple interventions have such a profound healing effect. And I think for most people, once they start that, they're they say, hey, this is actually working and I'm not working hard at it. It's taking me, a total of a few minutes a day to implement this. I want to learn more.
And where can listeners find you and the book and all of these resources online?
The book is very readily available on Amazon. And I have a website, Dr. just Dr. KulreetChaudhary.com. And I'll usually post all of my information there. And I do consultations at the Chopra Center, and I will be there from now until next May. And so you can call the Chopra Center in Carlsbad, California to schedule an appointment. And then starting next May, I will actually be moving to India to head up an international team of physicians and scientists at an Ayurvedic wellness center, where we're going to be doing even deeper research into how to repair the nervous system using some of these even more ancient techniques from Ayurvedic medicine. So I'm very, very excited about that, and I'll continue to write. But from now until next May, I will be available at the Chopra Center.
Well, Kulreet, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of this wisdom. There's some really interesting takeaways. And I think the fundamental conclusion that our gut impacts our brain health and our mental health so much more than we know or realize is really powerful. So thank you for coming on here and sharing all of this.
It was my pleasure. And Matt, I have to thank you. You asked really intelligent questions. And I always appreciate it when somebody comes in armed with, these very well thought out questions. So it really made this quite a bit of fun for me.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for listening to the Science of Success. We created this show to help you, our listeners, master evidence-based growth. I love hearing from listeners. If you want to reach out, share your story, or just say hi, shoot me an email. My email is matt@successpodcast.com. That's matt@successpodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I read and respond to every single listener email. I want to give you 3 quick reasons why you should join our email list today by going to successpodcast.com and signing up right on the homepage. First, you're going to get exclusive, curated weekly emails from us every single week, including Mindset Monday, which listeners have been loving, which is our list of our favorite articles, TED Talks, and ideas that we came across that week. Next, you're going to get a chance to shape the show, vote on guests, help us pick new intro music, like the new intro we rolled out a couple weeks ago, and much more. Be sure not to miss out on that opportunity. Lastly, and most importantly, you're going to get an awesome free guide that we created based on listener demand. It's our guide called How to Organize and Remember Everything. It's our most popular guide, which you can get completely for free, along with another surprise bonus guide that you have to sign up to get by joining our email list. Just go to successpodcast.com, sign up right on the homepage, or if you're on the go, just text the word SMARTER, that's SMARTER, to the number 44222. Remember, the greatest compliment you can give us is a referral to a friend, either live or online. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us an awesome review and subscribe on iTunes. That helps more and more people discover the science of success. Every single review, every single subscription boosts our ranking in the iTunes algorithm, and it really is super important. Don't forget, if you want to get all this incredible information, links, transcripts, everything we've talked about, and much more, be sure to check out the show notes, which you can also get at successpodcast.com. Just hit the show notes button right at the top. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Science of Success.